Welcome to part 5 of the Atavism X combat tutorial series. In this video, we'll be using everything that we've learned in parts 1 to 4 to quickly create a wide variety of abilities within Atavism. If you're new to Atavism, I recommend you follow along this series from the beginning. Let's get started. In the previous videos, we had successfully created an unarmed strength skill and our auto attack, but an MMORPG contains a wide range of skills and ability types, so we'll be expanding on our unarmed strength skill to create a wide range of abilities in order to exercise Atavism's capabilities. Start by opening up your Atavism X editor, then on the left side open the Combat tab and select the Abilities plugin. We'll start off expanding our unarmed strengths abilities by making a triple strike ability. The quickest way to do this is to find our unarmed strike ability, then right click it and press duplicate to duplicate it. We will rename the copy to triple strike, and we want this to hit 3 times really fast, so we will change the ability pulse time to 0.3 because that's roughly the animation duration of our punch animation, and we'll make it pulse 3 times. Next, let's make this cost some resource. We'll say it costs 100 mana on activation. Then we'll scroll down and give it a 5-second cooldown and start cooldown on activation, and we also want to make sure this triggers the global cooldown to avoid ability spamming. Now, because this is just punching 3 times, we don't really need to change the effect or coordinated effect. We can just use the base auto attack effect and animation. We only need to change the description of the ability here so that it reflects what the ability does. So I'll put in the description that it punches the target 3 times rapidly. And then we're done, so we'll hit update. Next, under the skills plugin on the left side, open that up and search for our unarmed strength skill and then open the skill up. Press the add ability button, and for the sake of testing, we'll make all of our abilities learned at level 1, but we could set this so that the player has to level the skill up first to learn new abilities. And then find our ability in the list by typing it in by name, triple strike. Hit update and done. It's easy as that. We could restart the server right now and start testing out the new ability. Normally when you're developing, it's best to test out your abilities one by one. But for the sake of brevity, let's make a bunch of abilities at once and then test them out all together. Next, we want to make a stunning bleeding strike. We can do that right from the skill window by pressing the add ability button, set it to level 1 and auto learn for testing purposes, and this time press the plus icon in the ability parameter. We'll name it, I guess, stun cut punch, and then choose an icon and set this as a combat melee ability. Assign it to the unarmed strength skill, and let's say it grants 1 experience. We'll leave all of the casting parameters blank, but set the cost to mana and set that to 200. Then we'll fill out all of the essentials. So weapon type is unarmed, target type is enemy, target state is alive, max range is 2, and remember for melee attacks always set speed to 1000 and requires facing target. For cooldown, we'll use the global cooldown and start cooldown on activation, and normally for CC abilities you'd like to set this to a long cooldown, but we'll set the cooldown to 5 seconds for testing purposes and we can change it later. Now on the target itself, we want to use a stun effect to stun them, so we need to make a new stun effect. So select affect the target and then hit the plus icon in the parameter next to it. Here we'll want to properly name the effect and icon because it will be a debuff that the player can mouse over and read. We'll choose a matching icon for our ability, and the effect type we're going to select is stun. Set the subtype to stun as well, and then set the duration to whatever you want the stun duration to be. I'll set it to 3 seconds, and then for the tooltip we'll just say stunned. And this is what you'll read if you mouse over the tooltip in the game. Then hit save and it should automatically fill into the fields of the ability. But we also want to make them bleed at the same time, so let's add another effect for the target and hit the plus icon again. Then we'll name this one Stun Cut Bleed and use a different icon so we can easily differentiate it from the stun effect on the debuff bar. This time select damage effect, and for subtype select physical damage over time, or DOT. We'll set it to damaging health, and we don't have a bleed damage type yet, so we can just set it to piercing damage for now so it goes against piercing resistance. We'll say it bleeds for 100 damage with a modifier of 1, and below that we can say the bleed will last 15 seconds and pulse 5 times. Basically 15 divided by 5 is 3, so it'll bleed for 20 damage every 3 seconds. And then we'll tie it to our unarmed strength skill and make it deal 1 times the level of our skill so that it gets stronger as we level up the skill. We could also let this stack multiple times, but we don't want that for this debuff in particular, so we'll set that to 1 and leave the rest blank and set the tooltip to say bleeding. If it gets moused over, this is what the player will read. Next, hit save and we'll see that the effect is also added to our ability. Now, this ability will stun and bleed our targets. And for now, for our coordinated effect, we'll just use the same punch effects on activating. And lastly, let's give it a good old description. Punch a target so hard that they get stunned and start bleeding. Now before we can save this, don't forget that some parameters are required to be filled out even when we are not using them. So set the cast time to 0 and set the pulse requirement to health, and then we can hit save and it should be added into the skills new ability field. And that's 2 abilities down already. Next, let's try adding a more action-oriented combat skill. We will add a frontal cone type punch that you would see in something like Terra or Black Desert Online. Hit add ability and then set it to auto learn at level 1 for testing, and then hit the plus icon next to the ability so we can create a new one. Now a lot of these fields will be exactly as we just filled them in, so I will speed through it. We will name this Big Punch. Pick a Big Punch icon, set it to combat melee ability, then link it to the unarmed strength skill and set the experience to 1. We can ignore all of the casting and pulsing for this one, and we'll say that it will cost mana and it will cost 100 every time it gets used. The weapon is unarmed, but this time we need a different target type. We will select AoE enemy, and that'll open up some new parameters for us to learn. Set the target state to alive, and let's talk about what these other fields mean. First, AoE type refers to how the area of this spell is decided. Player radius is around the player, target radius is around the target, and location radius is a space in the world. We'll select player radius because we're going to hit from our player a frontal cone. For chunk length, this decides the size of chunks that the AoE will be divided into based on its radius size. 1 is 1 meter, so for example, if our AoE has a radius of 3 and our chunk length is 1 meter, it would be divided into 3 chunks of 1 meter each. And targets that should be hit would be calculated separately for each of those 3 chunks. AoE hit calculation parameter decides if it's a real-time or a predicted AoE. In real-time, it's a bit taxing on the server, but it gives players the opportunity to dodge moving AoE before it hits them, whereas predicted will automatically predict who gets hit by it the moment it is cast, regardless of if they move out of the area after it's been cast, so they cannot dodge it if you're using the predicted method. For AoE target count type, this decides if the AoE will hit everyone in it, or the first target, or a random target within it. If you select first or random, you can set a number to it so that it will hit the first 5 targets, or it'll randomly hit 10 targets in an area, so the first and random parameters aren't limited to just a single target. We'll make it hit unlimited, so kind of like a cleaving swing attack that hits everybody in front of our warrior. For the radius, we will set this to 3, again deciding how big of an area from our player this covers, and the angle we will set to 180 degrees. The angle is always in front of the player and expands outward depending on how big the number is that you select, so if we want it to only hit targets in front of us, we'd set it to 180 degrees or lower, but if we want to have an attack like a whirlwind spin, we'd set this to 360 degrees. That should just about sort out all of the targeting, so we'll add on a max range of 3 and we'll set the speed to 1000 as always for melee attacks, and this time around it doesn't just dictate the speed of which our ability travels to the target, it instead is dictating the speed at which our non-target ability goes from its start location to its destination or the end of its radius, like a wave. For the case of using it from our player, it'll be traveling from the player to the end of the radius of 3 which we set, at the speed that we set here. Now because we want it instant, it's a melee attack ability, we will set it to 1000. But if you're using something like a wave or stream of energy that moves more slowly, you'll want to set the speed much lower to something like a 10 or a 20, so perhaps the other players have a chance to move out of the way and avoid the damage. You'll notice required target and require facing target should be grayed out because we're making an AoE ability without targeting involved. Set the pulse requirement to health just so it doesn't get mad at us later that it's blank, and then we'll add a global cooldown and a 5-second cooldown that starts on activation. Now that that's all sorted out, let's make our effect. Set the target type to target and then hit the plus icon to create a new effect. We'll name this the Big Punch effect and choose a random icon as this is going to be the damage, so the icon and description of this won't matter. Set the effect type to damage and set the subtype to melee strike effect. Damage property is going to be health. Damage type will be crushing, and we'll say this does 200 damage with a modifier of 1 and no transfer rate. No damage delay, no coordinated effect, pulse, and skill type is unarmed strength with a skill modifier of 1. And for coordinated effect, we'll just use the same punch effect for now. And the last thing here is just the description. We'll say make a big wide punch in an area in front of you. Save that and then update the skill, and we should have 3 new abilities now for our beautiful unarmed strength skill. The last ability we'll add here is a nice cool meditation-like ability. Let's add another ability, set the skill level to 1, and then auto learn again for testing, and we'll name this Meditate. Pick a meditate-ish type icon, and then this one will be a friendly effect ability. Once again, we'll link it to the unarmed strength skill, and we'll make it give 1 experience. And we'll set this to channeling, and we don't want to run while channeling. We want it to pulse 5 times every 2 seconds, so it will channel for 10 seconds in total. And we want it interruptible 100%, and we'll say that it has no activation requirements, but we need to be unarmed to meditate. Target type here is self only, targeting stay alive, 1000 speed with no min or max range, and we can't face ourselves, so no need to check that. We don't want any pulsing requirements, but we still need a cost type, so we'll put in health here. And again, we'll say that this is on the global cooldown and it starts on activation, and we'll keep it at a 5-second cooldown for testing. Now for this ability, we are targeting ourselves, the caster, and then we'll hit the plus icon to make our new effect. Now this effect will show up as our channeling cast bar, so we want to match the effect name and icon to the ability. We'll name it Meditating and pick the same icon, and for effect type, we want to restore instant, and we'll restore 100 health. For this, we don't want it to scale with our unarmed strength skill level, so we'll leave the rest blank save for the tooltip, and we'll just say Meditating. Now for coordinated effect, it's easiest to set this for pulsing channel abilities inside the effect itself, so we'll choose one that's easy for us to indicate that it is working properly. Using the file browser, let's just use the level up effect. Now this might be a bit overkill, but hey, why not? And then we'll hit save. Next, let's add a short description to the ability to indicate what it does: meditate and restore lost health. Save that and then update the skill, and we should be ready to go try out our 4 new abilities. First, we need to restart the server. If you're using the cloud server, you can do that by pressing the green circle icons in the top right of the editor and pressing the start and restart buttons. Otherwise, make sure that you restart your server based on how you are hosting it. Once the server is back up, open up your Unity project and hit play. Log into the game. Then select your warrior character and log in. Once in the world, you should immediately see the 4 ability icons on your hotkey bar, and if you open up your skill windows, you should find all of our newly made abilities will appear under your unarmed strength skill. So let's try them out one by one. The first ability is our triple punch. It should hit 3 times and cost 100 mana. So when we use it, you'll notice that the bug is taking damage 3 times instead of the normal 1 from an auto attack. Once we've confirmed that that one is working, let's try the stun cut punch next. This should put a stunning and bleeding effect on our target. So when we use it, we see that the 2 debuffs appear on the target and we can mouse over them and see that one is dealing the bleeding damage and one is just stunning them for 3 seconds. So that one is working perfectly. Next, let's try the big punch. This one is a frontal AoE ability, so to test this out, what I'm going to do is round up a couple of the bomber bugs and then just group them up and then use the ability to see if it's hitting all of them. Once you've confirmed that one is working properly, you should be able to see how to set up action combat in your MMORPG. Just be sure to be using good animations so that players can see what they're doing, and typically in these games you would be using root motion in the animator and stuff like that. Lastly, let's try the meditating to restore our HP. When we press it, we should start channeling, and every 2 seconds we should gain 100 health. Once you've confirmed that working, you manage to fully flesh out this unarmed strike skill into something you might actually find in an MMORPG, and it all seems to be working perfectly. So as you can see, it's pretty fast and easy to make a wide variety of skills using the Atavism editor, and the more you use it and practice with it, the easier and faster it becomes, and the more creative you can be with your skills and abilities that you create. But that's the end of the combat tutorial series. Congratulations on making it through to this point. You are now ready to go out there and start making your abilities for your players and monsters. If you want to learn more about the other plugins, be sure to check out the other video tutorials coming up, and if you have any questions, make sure to join the Atavism Discord and ask the staff or your fellow developers for help. Don't forget to subscribe to the Atavism YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be alerted when new videos on Atavism are released. Have a great day and happy developing.